Jeep. Jeep. I love you. Are you staring at the window? Him. Yes, Mom. Leave me alone. Okay, okay, I'll leave you alone. Okay, this should be the last one that I need to do to get caught up for the cover page story paired videos. And this one is the one that pairs with Django's Dance Paradise. And I decided to go with a character who is introduced in that cover page series, and that is Hina. Or at the time, she is Captain Hina. Later on, she is Rear Admiral Hina. So, some promotions happen. Up front, her title is Hina the Black Cage, or Black Cage Hina, depending on stuff. And her current, her unit is kind of referred to as the Black Cage Corps, which does include Django and Full Body, which we'll get into. Hina is 34 years old. I believe she's about the same age as Smoker. They were classmates during their time, essentially, as like recruits and everything like that. They were classmates. I think there's also a couple of others, like Cancer and a few others that are involved that were like classmates of theirs that we see later on down the line. She is introduced in Django's Dance Paradise cover page story in like the last two panels of it, which we'll get to. And then her anime, her anime introduction is at the end of the Alabasta arc, where she's trying to capture the Straw Hats, which we'll get to. She does have a devil fruit. She has the Ori no Mi, or the Bind to Bind fruit, or the Cage fruit, depending on which translation. Cage I like better because it goes with her cage, Black Cage Hina setup. Hina is one of the very capable Marines that we see. She also seems to be one of the Marines that aligns herself more with like kind of Garp's faction, or to a degree like probably with like the Sword faction. She's not in Sword to the best of our knowledge. Neither are Django and Full Body. But like they kind of seem like they would be ones that would like more land in like the good part of the Marines setup, like where Smoker and Tashigi and Garp and Swordfall and Fujitora and such, Kobe and Hamabu, like where they all fall. They seem to land more there. But, again, not sure. Hina also does the thing where she refers to herself in the third person, which is just funny. She's like, Hina has a question for Garp. Hina thinks Smoker is an idiot. Things like that, where she refers to herself in the third person. So, back to her devil fruit. As I said, she has the Cage no Mi, or the Ori no Mi, the Cage fruit, which is not one of the ones that I've made because we don't know what it looks like yet. Eventually, we might get a representation, a drawing of what it looks like, but that hasn't happened yet. That might just be something that Oda does way at the end of the series. Is just like, oh yeah, we got a lot of these other devil fruits that I never drew. Draw. Just like releases 20 of them at the same time. But so her devil fruit is a paramecia, and it allows her to create iron bars and iron bindings on her opponents, or produce them out of her body. I'll go over some of these as we see them in the story, but one of the things that we see her able to do is when she is fighting one of her opponents, like one of them tries to kick her and she just holds her arm up and they like kick her arm, but as it like passes through their arm, this like binding appears on their arm that's like kind of like formed out of her own arm. Again, it's a paramecia setup, so wacky rules are applied here. But they get like an iron binding on their leg or their arm if they tried to punch her or something like that, or on their full body if they, if she like, wraps her arm around them or whatever the heck the case is. She is also able to make cages themselves. We see her during Marineford. We see her when she fights Luffy. She kind of like sends out like these huge lines, these huge bars that like if they touch you, they will like bind you up, and like Luffy kind of dodges those. And she's able to do that. She can obviously dispel her bindings at any time if she wishes to, but they tend to be semi-permanent, I would assume, unless either, possibly exposed to, seawater or something like that. Or I guess there's a possibility they break down with enough time, but not sure. But so she's able to do that. She's able to also bind multiple people at once. And I think we kind of see her powers progress a little bit throughout the course of the series. She's probably had her, I think it's implied that she's had her devil fruit since she was a child, or at the very least like a teenager. She's probably had it the good chunk of time that she was in the Marines, kind of like how we kind of think Smoker has had his devil fruit for either, if not all of the majority of the time that he's been in the Marines. So we'll see. But going into her history, so as I said, she is 34 years old. Oda has drawn pictures of, what are you doing? Hey, what are you doing? Are you just licking stuff? Okay, fine. He's just licking things. Okay, he's just licking the bed. Whatever. Sure, whatever. Lick the bed. I don't have a problem with that. So, Oda has drawn Hina as a child. She seems to like birds, which I think Hina's name is a reference to like the Hina dolls that are in Japan and that are kind of popular to give to girls, like on Girls' Day and stuff like that. There's a whole Pokemon episode about Misty and Jessie trying to win Hina dolls, and there's other shows where they pop up in I Love My Dress Up Darling, and they, Gojo was trying to make Hina dolls in that. So there's lots of references to Hina dolls and stuff. So Hina's name is kind of a play off of that. I also think there's also a bird reference in there as well, because a lot of the female Marines have bird references in their name, like Tashigi is crane, or no, Tashigi is a bird, and Suru is crane, and stuff like that. So we see Hina as a little girl, and we see that she has like cages that either she already made herself because she has the devil fruit and she keeps birds in the cages, or either she had an affinity for that and therefore she ends up finding a devil fruit that really works for her in that way. Either one is fine. I think she had her devil fruit fairly early on in her career as a Marine. As I said, in her youth, she was a Marine cadet alongside Smoker and some others. And she was very, has obedience and professionalism and all of that. And they remain friends to this day. Even though Smoker is much more disorderly and she's much more by the book, which is funny. There is a cover page where they are essentially like out. I don't know if they're on a date, but I do ship Hina and Smoker, and they're like out, and Hina is very drunk and wants to go back into the bar, and Smoker's like, no, we're taking you home, as he's pointing at like a camel taxi. So funny bit there. I like that. But that's like much more recent. Eventually, we know that they both end up, becoming captains. Smoker, of course, ends up at Logtown, and Hina ends up in the Grand Line. We'll get to where she's introduced in a moment, but assumedly she also ends up in the East Blue at times as well. And we know that she's also on several times protected Smoker from the higher-ups for his own issues. So going into where she is introduced in the manga, we have Django's Dance Paradise, and she is introduced in the last two panels of that story. It is Django is getting ready to hypnotize Full Body and make Full Body forget about their friendship, so that way Django can go on his own and Full Body isn't going to feel, remorse or anything like that. And right before Django is about to finish hypnotizing and, making Full Body forget, Pretty Lady walks by, and that's Hina. She walks by, and one glimpse at her, just both of them immediately are just like, screw this, and they become like the lowest class seamen. They become like just like new recruits essentially, and Hina still has this soft spot for like unconventional personnel, which is kind of the reference to Smoker. So she just ends up having them join her crew. which is just really funny. It's like, now I gotta deal with these two idiots. Okay, whatever. It's like what she ends up having to deal with. I mean, like, they're still on her crew to this day. You know, we'll go over that, but they're still on her crew. From there, what ends up happening is then we eventually get to the Alabasta saga, or the Alabasta arc. And Hina shows up at Alabasta, and she still got Django and Fullbody on her crew. They've gotten a lot stronger since then. And she's sent to Alabasta to kind of help Smoker deal with Baroque works and kind of squash Baroque works. She's dealing with them along the coastline. And so, like, they've captured various other members, some of the lower ranked members and stuff like that. And they come across the ship Full, which has the ship with all the raid dance powder, with all the dance powder on it, that Crocodile was using to affect Alabasta's weather. They capture that. She kind of wonders if Smoker did something with it, but not really. She's like, it's fine. So we get that. She also knows that she kind of ends up like Smoker and Tashigi are the ones that technically get credit for capturing Crocodile, because it's not like they can give the credit to the Straw Hats, because that wouldn't look good for the world government. It looks much better for the Marines and the world government if Smoker and Tashigi manage to be the ones to... Really? You have to do that now? If Smoker and Tashigi are the ones to bring Crocodile in, isn't like the government taking care of its own mess with the fact that Crocodile was a warlord, as opposed to having it look like Crocodile got defeated by some random upstart pirate from the East Blue. So there. Hina is aware of this. I'm pretty sure Hina kind of figures some of this out. She's smart. So we see, like, she kind of meets up with them and everything else like that. And, she's kind of there through some of this stuff with them receiving the credit, even though she knows that, not that she has any doubts against Smoker and Tashigi's ability necessarily. It's just that she kind of ends up, I think, being aware that, like, Smoker and Tashigi didn't technically earn this, and the fact that they were not the ones who actually took down Smoker. Although Hina is actually the one who kind of, like, convinces Smoker to just accept the promotion, which he does. Him and Tashigi both get their promotions that way. But Smoker does not like the cover up. Come on. You're fine. I know. In any case, later on, Hina is the one sent to capture the Straw Hats. Let's close the door. Later on, Hina is the one who is sent to kind of intercept and try to capture the Straw Hats on their way to their ship, or once they reach their ship. Since the Marines have kind of figured out where the Mary is, and unfortunately for, we also know that Smoker's unit doesn't really make a lot of effort toward trying to capture the Straw Hats, because she knows that, because Smoker and Tashigi are kind of more aware of the fact that the Straw Hats are not bad pirates at this point in time. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but, like, Hina's like, yeah, no, I'm gonna go do my job and try to catch them. And she tries. She's waiting on the Alabasta coast when they arrive, when they're, setting sail out of Alabasta. And she tries to capture them. Doesn't end up doing them. Doesn't end up working. Because what it ends up being is the Swanda Express, which is Mr. Tu Bonclay's ship, has been adjusted to look like the Going Merry. And all of them, Bonclay's, impersonating Luffy, and the rest of the crew are all trying to impersonate the rest of the Straw Hats as they're sailing past. And Hina falls for this. And she ends up attacking them and fighting against their group, while the Straw Hats are able to escape, much to her dismay, which she does not like. She is very upset by this. does not like that this happens. And she kind of has to deal with Mr. 2. And I know Mr. 2, I believe, does manage to escape because we'll see him again a little bit. But he is kind of taken into custody for a little while. And, the rest of his crew are kind of taken into custody. And so we get kind of that. Hina doesn't like this. She's unhappy that the Straw Hats managed to escape. Fair. But she also notes that, like, Smoker doesn't seem annoyed by this. So that's what we get there. Next up, we get another cover page series that Hina kind of gets to take a major role in. We have Miss Golden Week's Operation Meet Baroque Works, which I'll be going over later on in this series, but for now we'll go over a little bit of it. So what we have here is that sometime after she arrests Mr. 2, he does manage to escape custody, and Hina is trying to find him. During this time frame, they end up on Keuka Island. I think it's Vacation Island, and she ends up there because she's trying to chase him. And of course, she ends up spotting, Miss Golden Week, Mr. 5, and Miss Valentine, even though they are in disguised. And they're disguised, but they're not the best disguises. So she is able to find them, and she easily captures Miss Valentine. Mr. 2 and Miss Golden Week manage to escape, but thanks to his explosive powers. But Hina uses Miss Valentine as bait, essentially. Is arranged a public execution. I don't know if Hina would have actually gone through with it, but she's putting up enough airs that, like, they kind of show up to try to help their friend. If her friends show up, she will spare Miss Valentine, is what happens. Thankfully, Mr. 2 shows up and ends up fighting against, it pretty much takes out Django and Full Body pretty quickly, since they are there as well. Slowly working their way up through the ranks. We saw them again at Alabasta after the Django's cover page series. We saw them again at Alabasta, and they have gotten stronger. And so we see that. We also know that Mr. 2 and some of the others are there, and Miss Golden Week and Miss Valentine and Mr. 5 are try to save Miss Valentine. So they're trying to do all of that, which they manage to do. We know that they do end up eventually getting captured, and they use that to free some of their other allies from the cells and stuff like that end up going off to be like set up the new Spiders Cafe, which I'll go over more in that cover page series, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But that's what we have there. From there, Hina's not happy that they escaped, but she did successfully capture both Mr. 2 and Mr. 3. So good, I'd say a good haul on her case. She got both of them. So that's good there. Then we kind of get into more just like Hina having various appearances throughout the rest of the series. So she does appear during the Amazon Lily arc. We see her showing up. We see her reaction to the announcement of Ace's execution, and she's one of the ones that gets summoned to Marine headquarters at Marineford, is where she ends up going. Then we have during the actual Marineford arc, she is of course present before the execution and listens to Sengoku's speech about Ace's past. Then, of course, we have that she is there during all of Marineford, and is there like when Luffy and his makeshift crew from Impel Down show up and all of that. And, she does try to capture Luffy, but it doesn't end up working, and at the end of the Marines, she's still there with the rest of the Marines. So she doesn't have any major appearances during that. She does try to attack Luffy, but it doesn't really go very well. She like admits defeat. Django and Full Body try to go against Luffy again. They both get beaten up very quickly. Then after the time skip, we jump ahead into the Zoe arc. She's not in the Return to Sabaody or Fishman Island or Pine Hazard or Dressrosa. She shows up at Zoe is when we see her again, and she is actually the escort for the Nefertari family from Alabasta to Reverie. So her and Django and Full Body are all there, and they're escorting Vivi and her family to uh, to the reverie. So that's what we get there. Then at the reverie, we do have it that Hina is, she's later present at the Red Port when the Marines, intercept, the communication about Big Mom and Kaido. So she kind of hears about that. And of course, she kind of hears, Rox's name get mentioned by like Sengoku, and she tries to talk to Garp about Rox because she knows that he has a history there. Hina might be kind of one of the ones who kind of knows who Rox is. She's not old enough to remember Rox actually being like out and being a pirate because she would have been not born yet. But maybe her parents talked about him or something like that, so maybe she has a rough idea of who Rox is. Depending on stuff, maybe she's one of the Marines that actually tries to do her job to the best of her ability and still pays attention to Marine intelligence. And Garp doesn't say that much about Rox, just that he, existed before Roger and that he was a very powerful pirate. I will point this out. It is non-canon, but I will point this out in regards to Film Stampede. Hina is present during Film Stampede. Tashigi and Smoker go undercover on the pirate island. Doesn't work very well. And, it's a pirate festival. And, of course, Hina is there, and so are Django and Full Body, along with, Tashigi, Kobe, and Helmeppo, and all of that stuff. And she actually uses her powers to, drag off Tashigi, Kobe, Helmeppo, drag them away from Smoker because they would help stay and help Smoker during the Buster Call. But they they get dragged off by her. I just wanted to point that out there. I know it's not canon, but I do find it cute. And then we get into her much more recent stuff, which is during Egghead. So during Egghead, she is at the new Marine Ford, which is the one that's built in the New World. And she is there. She ends up talking, she's at the cafeteria, and Sengoku's kind of asks her what's going on, and she says that Garp headed to Hachinosu, that he took the sword unit and went to Hachinosu. And both Sengoku and Tsuru are freaking out about this because they're like, okay, God, Garp, why did you do this? Oh no, Garp, why? So they're freaking out about that. Hina's just kind of there. And of course, Hina is, of course, one of the Marines that sees, the transmission. So much of the world sees the transmission from Vegapunk, but she's one of the ones that's watching it. And so we kind of get some of her live reaction to it. And, she's, hearing about the destruction of Lelucia and, different things like that, and about the earthquakes and things like that. And, she's kind of stunned to hear about the prediction that the world would sink. She's kind of stunned by that. And as I've stated, Hina is one of the Marines that we tend to like. She tends to lean more toward the more actual side of true justice, of the due process, and not all pirates are bad. Not that we've necessarily seen her let any pirates go, but she seems to fall more into that capacity. Not the way that Smoker has let the Straw Hats go at times, but you get the idea. So, but she seems to fall more into the category of, she actually wants to protect the citizens. She wants to protect her crew, which is fair. She wants to protect her friends in the Marines. But she also maybe understands that, justice, the Marines, pirates, all of that is not black and white, that the world government is not black and white. So we'll see how she ends up landing when, if there is this rift that happens in the Marines, we'll see what ends up happening there. I hope she's one of the ones that kind of stays on the side that's with Smoker and his group and all of that stuff and the Sword crew. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. As I said, I like Hina. She's, fun character. We've seen bits of her throughout the story. But that's what I have here for her. So I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.